All right, let's get going. I'm Howard Walthall with Venture Medical, and welcome to the second of our four-part webinar series on wound care compliance and audit defense essentials. Today, we're thrilled to have Katie Fergus with us. She is the president and owner of PractiSynergy, a medical billing and consulting firm specialized in supporting independent medical practices with customized revenue cycle solutions. With more than 25 years of experience in healthcare finance and operations, she has extensive expertise in billing for advanced wound care services. Katie and her team help providers across the country navigate credentialing, contract negotiations, documentation, and payer audits to maximize reimbursement while staying compliant with evolving guidelines. Katie is a CPA and a fellow of the American College of Medical Practice Executives. She brings both financial and operational insight to the challenges wound care providers face today. So we're thrilled to have her and have her wisdom on this important subject for all of you. After the close of her prepared talks, we should have some time for questions. So put those in the chat and we will bring those up after Katie's done. Katie, take it away, please. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Howard. Let's see, that's me. I also want to thank Carrie and Alyssa. They're doing stuff behind the scenes to make this work smoothly. So it's pretty slick to do these Teams webinars. Howard already gave you a brief introduction of me. So I'm going to be going over a brief introduction of PractiSynergy and how we do things different in the revenue cycle world. I then want to touch on some of the best practices of billing, specifically for wound care. And then we'll move on to some common mistakes or misunderstanding of billing documentation. During that segment, I'm actually going to provide some very specific examples that we've received as feedback for our clients that they have received during audits this year. And so you can have some real life examples of that feedback, audit feedback that clients, that providers really are getting. And then finally, we're going to leave time, as Howard mentioned, for a question and answer section. So please put any questions in the chat. My goal for you today is really to have you have a couple solid takeaways from this section. I know in a webinar, I always like to have at least one solid thing that I take away so that it doesn't feel like a waste of my time. So obviously don't want to waste your time either. So let's go ahead and get started. So a brief introduction of my business, my company, PractiSynergy. We are a small to mid-sized revenue cycle management company, and we've been around for almost 40 years. It'll be 40 years next year, actually. I've actually owned the business since 2017, so I'm in my 9th year of owning the business. We always, throughout our history, have served independent medical clinics, practices, and providers. We don't provide any type of revenue cycle services for hospitals or any other type of facilities at this time, but we do support the providers who work and do rounds in those facilities that are able to bill separately from the facility. PractiSynergy, we have 33 full-time employees, and we're mainly based here in the state of Iowa. Our headquarters is in West Des Moines, Iowa. But we do also have a data entry team in India for our non-wound care clients. They also do some payment posting for us. The specialties that we serve, and a lot of these lead to how we got into the wound care space. So we've historically always had a really large presence in podiatry. And obviously there's a lot of podiatrists in the wound care space doing conservative treatments and obviously now the advanced modalities. We also have many specialists that are surgical specialists that we bill for, including general surgery, plastic surgery, orthopedics are probably the top 3 that we serve. We have internal medicine and primary care providers that we work with. I think every single billing company out there has internal med or primary care. And that includes physicians, nurse practitioners, physician assistants, kind of all of the above. And then we have two smaller teams. One is a physical therapy team. They do PT, OT, speech. And then we do some mental health as well, kind of thrown in there. So we're kind of across the board, but we don't do radiology. There's some specialties that we just don't do. So we're not totally stretched thin. We do try to focus on those specific specialties that I listed in order to keep my staff very up to date on the regulations and the billing specifics that they can use in their day-to-day operations. Our approach, so unlike some of the low-cost billing companies that are out there that are offshore, we actually have a white glove service approach for our wound care provider clients. With this approach, we actually take the time and the effort, and I have the staffing in place to review each medical note to ensure compliance with the current LCD policies or the Advantage Plan guidelines. In those notes, we compare the wound measurements to the product size being used and also the code to make sure that that's appropriate and to the amount of product used and also the related application codes for the skin substitutes. As any billing company would, we also post the payments, work denials, work any rejections. We always do those within a couple business days of posting those after receiving them. And we communicate any of these denials, rejections to the provider and also to any person or people that the provider wants us to communicate with to ensure that everyone's all on the same page. So that's kind of another different approach that we take than other billing companies, because we view the relationship with the distributors and the sales reps as part of our team as well and part of the provider's team. We're all here to support the provider, and we want to make sure that if the provider didn't get paid for something, we want to communicate what actions are being done to remedy that situation and how we can move forward and get these providers paid, whether it's appeals, audits, what have you, and just making sure that that is communicated to everyone. And then finally, we support all of our clients through any of the audit processes and also the appeals process if there's any adverse decisions from the audits or from a claim adjudication. Next, I want to discuss some best practices to be successful in billing for wound care. I think on all of these webinars, every one of us is going to talk about documentation. Documentation. The one thing that will get you paid and allow you to keep your payment is thorough documentation and compliance with any of the active LCD policies, or if you're in a MAC that does not have an active LCD policy, making sure that you justify that medical necessity enough that it'll get past some of those reviews. So what does thorough documentation mean? Okay, so it doesn't mean just a note like I've been describing, but it also includes photos. It includes invoices. It includes your tissue IDs, ABNs. That's kind of a new one that we're seeing pop up in audits. You want to make sure that you have an advanced beneficiary notice, just in case that it comes back as denied. A lot of the audits are looking for the ABNs to be included with the documentation sent in with the audits. And then very important as well are any previous care notes. So the notes that are documenting the conservative treatment. So if you personally did not treat this patient, do the conservative treatment, you need to make sure that the notes you're getting from the provider who did provide that care is thorough. You want to make sure that it's thorough enough for you to be able to submit with your audit documentation to justify that if you did apply a skin substitute, that the treatment previous did fail and that it's well enough documented that the auditors will agree with that. Next is timeliness. I don't want to tell you the number of times I have had providers say, well, I just want to wait till the whole course of treatment is done before I chart or before I send a claim. Don't do that. Notes need to be completed within days of the treatment. You are never going to remember all the details of the treatment that you're providing if you wait weeks or months. And then cash flow wise, these skin substitutes are expensive. So there's manufacturers waiting to get a lot of people waiting to get paid. So you want to make sure that the claims are going out as timely as possible. But I say that with a little asterisk, you don't want to send a claim out without a complete and compliant note. So you want to make sure your notes are complete and compliant at the same time as before you send that claim out the door. Next is coding review. So our coders, so we have certified coders on staff. It's more than just reviewing the coding. So our coders and certified coders are looking at the definition of the codes. They're looking at the LCD policies. They're looking at kind of the whole picture of what it means to be compliant, and making sure that the provider notes sustain that compliance. So they'll help all of those LCD policies help justify the medical necessity of those treatments. Additionally, a coding review should include reviewing the pricing at least quarterly. As we all know, the ASP is updated quarterly. It just updated recently. And so going through that, making sure the pricing is updated so that you're billing, so that for one thing, you're not missing out on revenue if the price went up, or if it went down, making sure that what you're billing is reasonable on the claim. So one tool that PractiSynergy uses is we use a checklist that we've internally developed that actually mimics the active LCD policy. We've kind of combined the active LCD policies, and my coders have developed a proprietary checklist that they use, and we also provide it to our clients. And they go through it, making sure that every single item on the active LCD policy is met. If you're not in an active LCD policy area, this also helps your justification for medical necessity. So by using the active LCD policies, you can at least say you had a framework of what you used to make your note to justify medical necessity. And that's at least a reasonable justification when you're going through some of these audits or appeals. We also use that checklist to provide feedback to the providers. And we do this all prior to actually sending the claims out. We don't send a claim out. And again, this is how PractiSynergy works, not necessarily every billing company, but we won't send a claim out until we feel that that note is compliant or meets our standards for meeting those LCD requirements that are out there. We then we request that addendums be added to the medical notes in order to satisfy that. We will then review the notes again to ensure completeness before sending out those claims. All right, I'm going to move on to some mistakes and some misunderstandings that we see all the time with new clients, existing clients, and just also I hear it from distributors or reps. that are kind of talking. And so there's some things that I just want to clear up and make sure that we're all on the same page. And I actually ran this by my coders as well to get some feedback as to some of their top things. So I tried to include some of their top concerns that they're constantly addressing when we get new clients in order to make this a useful presentation. So I would say the top one relates to IVRs. So the insurance verification report is an important, again, it's a tool. It's a very important tool for manufacturers to use, distributors to use, to make sure that the treatment's going to be covered. However, there are some important questions that the provider should be asking throughout the IVR process and evaluating when it does come back. So is whoever doing the IVR, are they checking to see if the provider is in network for each patient? Maybe they have a contract with Aetna, but Aetna is known to have some very narrow networks. So are they checking specifically each network to make for that specific plan? Are they in network? Will this be covered? We've had several instances where they've kind of missed that kind of next level. Yep, they have a contract with Aetna, that's all good. Well, they didn't go to the next level. And so we end up getting denials saying you're out of network, we don't cover out of network providers. So that's an important question that needs to be in the back of a provider's mind. So if it's Medicare Part B, are they double checking to see if there's a Medicare Advantage plan on file? If there is, making sure that that's communicated to the provider to gather that insurance information to see if they're in network with the Medicare Advantage plan. Also with Part B, when you get the IVR back and it's quote approved, all that's really checking is that patient has an active Medicare Part B policy, because in general, a skin substitute is a covered product. However, it doesn't mean that claim is going to pay, because you still need to meet the medical necessities. So it's not an automatic, yep, you're approved, you're good to go, anything you submit will pay. It comes with the caveat that for any of these, including even if it is a Advantage plan, that these IVRs are not guarantees of payment. It's just saying they have active coverage. Next on the list is the Medicare Advantage coverage. So each Medicare Advantage plan insurance company has their own guidelines. So United Healthcare has set rules on skin substitutes. Anthem has their own set rules. Aetna, Cigna, Humana, you kind of name it. They all kind of have their own guidelines, their own policies. In general, if you are in a state that has that Medicare, where the Medicare MAC has an active LCD policy. So like Florida, First Coast has an active LCD policy. The Advantage plans should follow the Medicare guidelines in those cases. However, some of those plans do go an extra step, and that some of them still require a prior authorization. Some may require extra documentation review throughout the claim submission process. You just need to be aware of those extra steps as you're going through this whole process. Next is secondary insurance. We get a lot of questions about secondary insurance. And so in general, secondary insurance comes into play for the 20% that Medicare assigns as co-insurance. And then at the beginning of the year, there's a $200 deductible as well. But it's the co-insurance is really where for skin substitutes, this really comes into play. So most of the commercial secondary plans out there will pick up that secondary, what Medicare is not paying for that co-insurance. So most will pay that. However, there's a lot of I would say most state Medicaids, and there are some commercial plans where if the provider is out of network, or has some other caveats, that those particular plans will not pay the remainder of what Medicare does allow as payment. So just be aware that sometimes the provider may need to bill the patient for an amount, or it goes unpaid in some way, shape, or form. Some things if you know, a distributor or a rep might not know, but some of these secondary payments sometimes come on what's called a virtual credit card. I know the providers out there groan and just hate seeing these things, and so do we as a billing company. Because what that means is the providers will incur essentially a processing fee if they have to run it through their own merchant service account. So that, you know, between 2.5% to 5% off the amount that they're going to be reimbursed. So that takes it directly from their profit. These are very, very common in secondary payments. So one way to kind of combat that is you can request a check or an ACH payment, but you cannot, you know, if you're going to do that, you essentially have to return the virtual credit card and say, hey, reprocess this as a check or an ACH payment. Then it'll be another probably 60 to 90 days before you get that payment. So there is a timing issue there. So if you want your money faster, you can go ahead and run that virtual credit card, but just know that you likely are going to have additional fees from your merchant service vendor. Next, most of you all know this, especially over the last few years here, any claims over $99,999.99, so anything $100,000 and more, so 6 figures or more, must be split into multiple claims. Before we started doing skin sub billing, this really wasn't a thing we had to worry about. I think some some of the larger entities did have to worry about, or if you have very large claims in general, but most, for sure, primary care physicians never had to worry about this. So there's some best practices to splitting these claims that I'm going to share. I would say first, the first best practice is to have different number of units on each claim. So if on one claim you have 50 units with $50,000, on claim 2, maybe you want 45 units with $45,000. So by having different units and different charge amounts, this will help reduce the chance of a duplicate claim denial. It's not to say that a duplicate claim denial won't occur, because they still do. Even if you do everything right, we still get duplicate claim denials, and we're doing everything seemingly right, and for the most part. But it still happens. It depends on who's processing the claim. They'll be like, oh, I already billed. So that at that point, they're just looking at the code. You already billed that code. This is the same data service, same code. But what they're not looking at is there's also a line note that needs to be put on each of the claims. And it says claim 1 of 2, 2 of 2, claim 3 of 3, what have you, to make sure that that also is indicated on the electronic claim or paper claim, whichever you're sending. And that helps, again, your justification that it's not a duplicate claim. Next are checklists. So I mentioned our checklist earlier, and I'll touch on that again here in a bit. So a lot of reps or distributors give their clients, give their providers a checklist of things that need to be done, measurements that need to be taken. Are they a smoker? Sometimes it's a pretty basic checklist, and then has some areas for them to write notes. This checklist in itself is not the actual medical note. Again, this is another thing when we get some new clients coming to us, they're like, here's my notes, and they provide us this checklist, and we're like, that's not a medical note. And so that's a tool. It's a great tool. It's a great tool for when they're out in the field treating the patient. But use that tool to develop the actual medical note for your skin substitute. These medical notes need to be almost at the detail level of a surgical note. So again, a lot of primary care providers aren't necessarily used to doing that level of detail in a medical note. They're used to an E&M visit or maybe a couple basic procedures that they might do during a visit. But in order to meet all the LCD guidelines, it needs to be at such a detailed level that these medical notes can be, 3 to 6 pages long. So the goal is not to make a short note. The goal is to make a note that justifies the medical necessity and is compliant with the current LCD policy. So as I mentioned earlier, PractiSynergy uses a checklist, and we also send it out to the providers that we contract with. And this is an extensive checklist, and it helps us review the note. So we're going through, but that's not used as the note. So we use it to provide the feedback to the providers, stating what's missing or what should be enhanced in their note in order to help justify that medical necessity and compliance with the policies. My next bullet point here is regarding just a brief bullet point on credentialing services. So we do also offer credentialing services. And another misunderstanding when we get a new client is, oh, I already have my PTAN, I'm ready to bill. That doesn't mean you're ready to bill. So if you're starting a new business, for instance, you need to get a tax ID number, and you need it all to be linked to, so the new tax ID number that you're going to get for your new business is going to be linked to your personal PTAN, and the business will have a PTAN. It's called a group PTAN, and your personal will have a PTAN as well. Similarly, you'll have 2 MPI numbers. So you have your individual MPI and you have a type 2 MPI. The type 2, formerly known as group MPI, similar situation. You need that to kind of, and you need them all linked together. And what that does is it tells Medicare where to send the payments. So as a provider, you can be linked to multiple different entities. So you can be linked to a hospital. Maybe you work for a hospice or a home health agency. You can be linked to a couple different clinics in your past. So if you're starting your own business, you want to make sure the money that you're making goes to your business, not any of the other ones that are out there. And so this is kind of what that PTAN and setting that up correctly in PACOS, in the PACOS system, does. This will help you get the money that is yours. And that's one service we provide, is to make sure that your PACOS is set up correctly in order for those payments to go to the right place the first time. And my last note on credentialing is it's best practice to use an EIN or a tax ID number and not the provider's social security number. You can consult an attorney or your accountant to go through the risks and benefits of using your social security number. I personally wouldn't want to, if I were a provider, I wouldn't want my social security number on a medical claim, because any patient can request a copy of a medical claim. And so then your personal social security number would be on there. Again, that's my personal view. There's attorneys and accountants that can further advise you on that. my next bullet point here is conservative treatment documentation. This is where I'm going to start pulling in some of the audit findings that we've had specifically related to the audits and our clients that we're seeing kind of over and over again. You know, almost back, I would say 1 year ago, our success rate for getting through audits and appeals was nearly 100% success. But starting at the beginning of the year, it's almost zero success now. I mean, for first time through an audit, it's like 100% of the claims that they're auditing are found deficient. That was, and I know that's across the board, no matter what MAC you're in, doesn't matter how good of a billing company you have. That's the atmosphere we are in right now. And so I just wanted to share a few of these audit findings and what can be put in the notes or in the charts to make sure that you're preparing for these audits so that you're not caught off guard. So the first one relates to conservative treatment. So I'll quote one of the findings that we had. So the documentation did not support sufficient information about the beneficiary's failure to respond to prior conservative wound care measures for greater than 4 to 6 weeks with documented compliance. So what does that mean? In layman's terms, the notes for the conservative treatment did not have a detailed assessment of the wound. So you need to make sure that all your conservative treatment has those detailed assessments at each treatment, at each conservative treatment. Additionally, in those conservative care notes, you want to make sure that the A1Cs and other labs that are ordered and provided need to be documented when they occur, and then also documented in supplements, notes thereafter to make sure that even if you haven't done an A1C reading right away, make sure you have the last one in there. That's really important while kind of carrying forward some of those notes. Next is another kind of big one that we're seeing, and we're hearing it also from really the legal experts. I know I've sat on a few of these webinars, is the terminology of graft versus wound barrier or wound covering. So the audit finding, I have a quote from here, was on a couple of our providers who are in Florida. So the quote is this: a skin substitute graft acts as an ulcer or wound treatment by providing scaffolding to allow cell growth. When the amniotic membrane is used as a skin substitute graft for wound treatment, it is considered non-homologous use in the recipient, which is not approved by the FDA. These non-homologous uses of this product are considered investigational and not reasonable or necessary for ulcer or wound treatments. So that's where it pulls into we're seeing a lot of investigational, not reasonable or necessary denials. And so one of those, the advice we're getting from a couple different experts is to change the terminology in the medical note itself from graft to wound barrier or wound covering. And while it may not completely eliminate these type of audit findings, hopefully it'll help reduce that type of finding. The next on the list is not having a description of the failure of the treatments. And so again, an audit finding that we came across was the documentation failed to establish the beneficiary failed conservative wound care with documented compliance. So again, what does that mean? It means that there was not a detail of why. Why did these conservative treatments fail? Was there enough time for these conservative treatments to have time to heal? You know, did you give it enough time, or did you just do it one week, another treatment another week, another treatment another week? Oh, and that's my 4 weeks. Nope, they all failed. Well, you know, some of these treatments take a few weeks to start working. Did you give it enough time? Why? And if you did, why did it fail? Or describe why you feel it failed. In the same breath, once you start doing the skin substitutes, the wound barriers, and you switch products partway through, why? Why did you switch products? Why are you using a different skin substitute now, mid-treatment? And then finally on my list here, and the last point I'll make this afternoon, is you really need to track the wound size from the very, very beginning. So all the audits are coming back. They want a baseline measurement. So that's the very first encounter. So if you're doing the conservative treatment, you need to make sure that you're documenting that wound size at that first encounter. If you're getting those notes from a home health agency, you need to make sure that the home health agency is documenting those wound sizes. They also want to see the size of the wound after 4 weeks of conservative treatment. And then obviously the sizes at each application as well. And then so once you're done, they also want a final measurement. So if it's closed, say it's closed. If it's a 1 by 1 at the very end, say that and tell them that maybe you're just using conservative treatment to finish the closure at that point. They want to see that progression all the way through, from the very beginning all the way through to the end, from when you finish. And then finally, kind of related to the size, is the products that you're ordering and placing on these wounds, they need to be as close as possible to the actual wound size. I realize sometimes it's a guess going from week to week, and maybe you're traveling an hour to see the patient, so you don't exactly know what the wound size is when you get there that day. Bring a couple products. You kind of use your medical decision making in that too, but they want to minimize waste. You can still bill for waste and it's payable, but they're seeing so much waste in some of these wounds that they're saying there's other products or there's other sizes that you should be using in order to get as close as possible to that wound size, so that you're not costing the government so much money. All right. Well, this concludes kind of my high-level presentation about the best practices for wound care. I'm going to hand it over to Howard, to facilitate the questions, and I'll try to answer as many as possible here.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. That was great. I will note some of these are business questions about Katie's practice, and I'm not going to have her answer that all out loud, but please email her. You see the emails up there, and talk to her about what your needs are from that perspective. Okay, we had multiple questions about the ABN. You mentioned needing to send an ABN. Someone asked, do you need an ABN with each visit, or can you have one for the patient's course of treatment? So some of these are pretty specific. Sorry.
Yeah. No, that's a good question, because for instance, ABNs are used commonly in podiatry for nail clipping and things like that. So there's what we recommend is one per visit. So because you don't know how long the treatment's going to be, you need to make sure that the code's on there, the approximate cost, in theory that the patient could be responsible for, the name of the patient, their information. Those forms are standard Medicare forms. So you can Google it and find the form on CMS's website.
Great. Okay, an even more detailed one maybe. Should the line note claim number be in box 19 of CMS 1500?
I would have to research that one.
Okay.
I don't want to get that wrong.
This is kind of more general. Why is it so difficult for providers to find out their payment rates for Med Advantage plans?
So related to the Q codes or for skin substitutes, your payment rates should be the same, on the ASP. So it should be the same as the ASP. So, and that's specifically to Medicare Advantage plans. For the other codes, like the application codes, you should have a contract.
Right. Would you suggest using modifier JW or JZ or leaving them off?
That's dictated by the max, and I believe it is required. JZ is required for if you use for the full amount used. JW is used for the waste.
Okay. If you had not had an audit yet, do you recommend that we go back and edit our notes?
That's a really good question. And I'll tell you what my coders say. I'm not a certified coder myself, but this is what they say. So if it hasn't been too long, yes. So I would say within the last month, yes, you can go ahead and go and do an addendum. If it's been much longer than that, it's kind of frowned upon by the auditors. And what we do in scenarios like that, with the audits, so if it's been a while and they know they want to add something, and we kind of advise against adding it to the actual medical note, but we do advise them to write a letter or write just a separate letter to explain the circumstances of maybe why it wasn't included in the note to begin with.
Okay. What documentation is required in the provider's note to justify the use of modifier 25? How can we educate on differentiating between services that qualify for modifier 25 and those that do not?
I am not a certified coder. I'm not qualified to answer that question.
Okay.
I can research that with my coders, if they want to email me that question, and we can get them the resources to answer that question.
Okay. Auditors are asking for the signature attestation statement form. Does this have to be submitted for every visit or just the initial visit?
Signature attestation form. I haven't seen that one requested on an audit, so I'm not sure what the patient is attesting, if that's for treatment or if that's for financial responsibility. So without knowing the exact circumstance, I can't fully answer that question.
Okay. Will Medicare fail you on an audit due to not having an ABN in the file?
I would say most of the audits that we have sent in don't have them. But again, most of our, almost everything is coming back as adverse decisions. And that's never really given. I don't think I've ever seen an audit finding that the ABN wasn't included. It's just in the list of items that they're requesting for the audit. So again, we haven't seen it as an audit finding, but it is in the list of items that we've seen that they are requesting.
Okay. Are there risks in using templated wound care notes for applications? I think you mentioned checklists already.
Yes, I think so. You want to make sure that templates are fine. Absolutely, they're fine. However, you want to make sure that you're updating all the fields in the template for the current treatment day. So you want to make sure that you're addressing, whether it's how the patient currently feels, what the wound looks like, obviously the measurements, all of that needs to be updated. A lot of the history can be pulled forward, and that's not a problem. But all the new documentation that you are attesting to as the provider, you want to make sure that you're asking those questions and documenting it based on what you are visualizing and verbalizing with the patient that day.
All right. A couple questions about split claims. Your suggestion of putting claim 1 of 3 on the form, where would you put that?
I'd have
Do
to,
you use,
yeah, I'd have to research that with my billers to see what box that goes in.
okay. Some people are making their own comments. So read the chat if you want other people's opinion on some of these things. How can healthcare organizations identify at-risk claims before submission and optimize both denial prevention and audit outcomes?
Repeat the question, Howard.
Sorry. How can healthcare organizations identify at-risk claims before submission and optimize both denial prevention and audit outcomes?
I would say one trigger. So I would say treat every high dollar claim as a potential audit target. I don't want to give us, I don't think any of us want to give specific advice of what's going to trigger the audit. It could be a dollar amount, it could be frequency, any of those. But with the skin substitutes, I would definitely treat all of them as an audit target at this point because they are.
Yep. There are only LCDs for DFUs and VOUs. Should these be applicable for other graft treatments as well?
So we use it as a guide. We use those LCD policies as the guidelines for pressure ulcers and sacral sores, things like that, for other type of wounds. We use that again as a basic template to help justify the medical necessity. Not all the things obviously are going to be applicable, like the diagnoses and things like that. So as the provider, you're going to have to pull in that medical decision making on why you really feel that a skin substitute is the best course of action for that type of wound. And so that really is in your court, if you will, to be able to justify that. And you need to be able to justify it to the point where if you're in front of an ALJ, when you're writing your note, just pretend you're in front of an ALJ, write it to that level to be able to explain yourself why you wanted to use it. Since there's not an active policy for other types of wounds, we advise just going that extra mile and getting as specific as possible as to why you chose that course of treatment.
Agreed. Yeah, it's just to highlight. I mean, technically, they say they don't apply to anything else, but they are general guidelines that you can use. So I think that's good advice.
Yep.
People say that claims 1 of 3 should go in box 19. Let's see. Okay, here's one last one. What can be a good documented reason for wastage in case the wound size decreases? For example, last week it was 16 square centimeters, so we ordered a 4x4 graft, but the next week the wound improved and went to 10 square centimeters, causing wastage. I guess the question is, what should you say in your notes about what happened?
I would say just that, that the product available was a 4x4, and that's what you used on the wound, based on prior measurements. That's the product that you had available, and then go from there. That the additional six square was waste.
Makes sense. All right. Well, those are the questions I see. So please join me in thanking Katie for coming and giving us some great information. Thank you so much, Katie. And thank all of you for joining us today. Some people asked about a recording. There will be a recording posted on our YouTube channel next week, and you should receive a follow-up email when that is live. Be sure to join us on October 24th for part 3 of this wound care compliance and audit defense series. Dr. Dan Kapp and David Trasty will join us to talk about audits, how to respond to them, understanding each step of the process, and the importance of preserving your appeal rights. And one thing I know Dr. Kapp would want us to emphasize to you is you cannot wait until the end of the process to add evidence. So you need to get involved with someone who can help you immediately when you find out about an audit so that you can put in the evidence that you need to argue about things later. And as Katie was saying, you're not going to win at the first stage very often. Remember, you're basically talking to the same person who didn't like what you had to say before. So you need to prepare yourself for later discussion with other people like ALJs. So as Katie was saying, think about that when you do your documentation, and also when you respond to an audit, get some help and make sure we're putting in what we need to make the right arguments in front of the ALJ. Katie, anything else to add?
No, I don't think so.
All right, everybody, there's her information. If you need help, she's a great resource. And thank you all and have a great weekend.